I'm going to tell you what you need to know if you're visiting Washington, D.C. during school field trip season. Hello, welcome to Trip Hacks DC. My name is Rob. I'm a tour guide here in the nation's capital. If you're coming to Washington, D.C. and you're looking for the best tips, tricks, and hacks for exploring the city, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit the bell notification icon so that you don't miss any new videos. And if you're interested in signing up for a Trip Hacks DC tour, head on over to triphacksdc.com afterwards to see the tours that we offer. If you're planning a trip to Washington, D.C., you might want to be aware of what we tour guides call field trip season. I'm going to tell you what it is, when it is, and what you should expect if your visit overlaps. And if you have ever visited DC during field trip season before, leave a comment on this video and let everyone know how you thought it went. Otherwise, let's get started. So first, what is school field trip season? For many schools in the eastern half of the country, making a trip to Washington, D.C. is sort of a rite of passage. Field trips are a huge part of the D.C. tourism industry, and even though I am not one of them, there are many tour guides who make a living primarily giving tours to school groups. Most schools send 8th grade class trips, which is why you will also occasionally hear it referred to as 8th grade field trip season. 8th grade is usually the class that gets to come to DC because it's kind of a last hurrah before the kids get sent off to high school. But I have personally led school groups with kids from 5th grade all the way up to 12th grade, and every grade in between. I've even done a handful of college class trips over the years. For small schools, there might only be about a dozen or so students in the group. And for big schools, there could be well over 100 students in the group. Okay, so now you know what it is. The next important thing to know is when it is. There are actually 2 field trip seasons. The big one is in the spring, roughly from mid-March through mid-June. And then there's a secondary one in the fall, roughly from early October through Thanksgiving. So, if you're trying to avoid field trip season, the months you want to consider for your trip are December, January, and February in the winter, and July, August, and September in the summer. Most schools choose to come in the spring because it's sort of an end of the school year reward. Plus, the students get to spend all school year learning about social studies and history, and then they get to come to DC and see things up close. The fall field trip season is much less busy, since most schools don't want to do the trip at the beginning of the school year. And of course, the last thing you want to know is what to expect. The most important thing to know is that they travel together as large groups. So, if you're visiting the Vietnam Veterans Memorial and 4 groups of 50 students arrives at once, which is not an uncommon thing in the spring, that's over 200 people at the memorial all at the same time. And to be 100% honest, this is the kind of place that's just so much better to experience when there's not a huge crowd there with you. Now, the way that these groups plan their itineraries is pretty straightforward. School groups are only in DC for a limited amount of time, so they need to maximize that time as best as possible. That means that during the day, they're going to be at the sites that are only open from 10 to 5, like the museums and the other indoor sites. Then, after dinner, they're going to head out and tour the monuments and memorials, since there really aren't a lot of evening activities you can do with big groups of teenagers. In some of my previous videos, I have recommended seeing the monuments in the evening, and my most popular tour is an evening monuments tour. But you have to know that if you're visiting during spring field trip season, you're going to be sharing those monuments with a lot of other people. As far as restaurants go, field trip groups tend to stick to a limited number of places. For lunch, they go to food courts. The food courts at Union Station, LaFont Plaza, the Reagan Building, and Pentagon City Mall are all popular choices. Food courts are ideal for these type of groups because they're cheap and they give the students a lot of different choices. For dinner, they go to the inexpensive-ish restaurants that can accommodate groups. This is the Hard Rock Cafe, Buca de Beppo, Carmine's, and similar chain places. School groups usually stay at suburban hotels because they travel on charter buses and don't need to be near metro, and also because suburban hotels usually give better group rates. Although you will occasionally see school groups that are staying downtown, especially if they're a small group who doesn't have a charter bus and wants to be within walking distance of the sites. So, if you plan to stay at a downtown hotel, which I recommend, and eat at mostly local restaurants, you're probably not going to bump into too many of these groups at those places. And that's it! Thank you for watching this video. If you found it helpful, you can subscribe to this channel by clicking on the Trip Hacks DC logo, which is popping up right now at the bottom of the screen. And if you're coming to DC and want to sign up for a Trip Hacks DC tour, you can click on the Capitol Dome on the left side of my head. That'll send you over to triphacksdc.com, where you can see all of the tours that we offer. Enjoy your trip!